What's up, everyone? It is Lucy here, joined by Cam.
Hey, Luce.
Hey, Cam. Now, we are obviously doing our little Hearthstone series where you basically introduce me to the various sort of the popular decks that are being played right now, and I learn about them, so therefore I don't suck quite as hard at Hearthstone as I have been.
Yeah.
It's a great sort of entrepreneurial project, I think, personally.
I live to give.
Yep. Today we are going to be looking at Tempo Mage. Now,
That's
Cam,
right.
you've been playing a fair bit of this, and you said that you've had a really good win rate with this deck.
Well, I had a good win rate in the last 24 hours.
Right.
So I played 8 games yesterday and won all 8.
That is
So
amazing.
I went from rank 13 to 9 in one sitting.
That is amazing. And
But-
listen, there's a twist.
But that is not always my experience with Tempo Mage. I really like the archetype. I think it's really fun and all the synergies are cool and it can just be incredibly explosive.
Yep.
And I played a lot of it like at the tail end of last year. But since then, when I've gone back to it, I just have played a few games and just haven't done very well. And so I've just been waiting for it to find its mojo again. And so the list I've been playing is a little bit different to what I was playing, but not that different.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I just hit a good patch. Like, Tempo Mage can be really, really strong. It's definitely like near top tier. Like it's a very competitive deck. You are quite reliant on your draws, but it's a very creative deck in the sense that, it's a very flexible deck, I should say, in the sense that it's very high synergy, but there's a lot of different ways that synergy can work.
Okay.
So I'll take you through like a couple of deck lists. This isn't the one that we're going to see me playing after we have our chat, but it's pretty representative of what a Tempo Mage deck list looks like right now.
Yep.
Okay, so the key cards here are low-cost minions that synergize with low-cost spells.
Yep.
Because what you want to do, and the whole reason it's called Tempo Mage, is you want to basically be using all your mana every turn and cheating mana. I mean, you want to be curving out, but in a different sense than the way what that often implies.
Yeah.
Which is that you want to play a 1-drop on 1, a 2-drop on 2, a 3-drop on 3. Here you want to be curving out in the sense that you are maximizing the efficiency of your cards, and you're using your cards in a more efficient way than your opponent can use their cards, and thereby you are controlling the board, you are dictating terms, and you have the tempo in the game. You are setting the tempo in the game.
Yep.
So the idea is to get off to a really fast start. You can't always do that, but ideally you want to be playing a Mana Worm on turn 1.
Straight off the bat.
Because if you have the coin, you can play Mana Worm and then coin into another Mana Worm. That's like the dream opening. So you have a 2-3 and a 1-3, and then on turn 2 you have a bunch of really low-cost spells that you could potentially play to remove whatever they play, and then pump your Mana Worms up even further.
Yeah.
But like the interesting thing about it is there's a lot of choices in the early game. There's a lot of cheap removal. There's a lot of options, and so you pretty much have to know the matchup you're facing and be looking a few turns ahead to decide what to do. For instance, you would very rarely play a Sorcerer's Apprentice on 2 because you want to get the effect.
Right.
You want to be able to get the effect. Unless, say, it's turn 2, you might play Sorcerer's Apprentice and then you can play Arcane Missiles for free.
Yeah.
But you definitely always want to be getting something additional out of... You want to be building your Mana Worm. You want to be, getting cheaper spells. And with Flame Waker, which is the card that pretty much made Tempo Mage viable. And this came out with Blackrock Mountain. And this is like the extra piece of synergy that Tempo Mage was really needing to be a very competitive deck.
And Flame Waker can be a devastating card.
Flame Waker can be just so explosive.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't even need to necessarily... I mean, you want to draw it early so you can start prepping for how you're going to use it. But even if you draw it late, if you've got enough cheap spells in hand, it can do incredible damage. In fact, sometimes you hold on to it for quite a long time just in preparation for the turn where you go off. Flame Waker is a card that you almost never play on turn 3.
Right.
Unless you're playing it on 3, then playing the coin, and then playing a 1-mana spell. Flame Waker, then coin, and then, say, Arcane Missiles.
Right.
That represents, like, just 7 random damage just out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But Flamewaker, yeah, you're very much gearing up to when you're going to use it. So it's these kind of very high synergy minions that are the basis of the deck alongside a whole bunch of low-cost spells. Then you've also got, obviously, Mad Scientist because, mage secrets are very powerful, but they're relatively expensive.
Yep.
So if you can get, a secret, into play without having to pay the mana cost, again, you're cheating mana. So this is very much a deck about cheating mana and efficiency. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of build out the low-cost spells. Arcane Blast has come into vogue in the last, since it was released, basically, because it synergizes with things like Azure Drake.
Right.
To do 4 damage for 1 mana.
Yeah, I was actually going to say I did play an old Tempo Mage. Like, I played a variation of this, and Arcane Blast was not part of it.
Yeah. It's not that old an edition. I mean, Arcane Blast, I can't remember which set it came with, but it's not that. It's a relatively new card.
Right. Yeah.
Arcane Missiles there's always 2. Sometimes there's 1 Arcane Blast, sometimes 2. Sometimes 1 Flame Cannon, sometimes 2, but generally it's always in there in some form. Always 2 Frost Bolts, almost always 2 Unstable Portals. But your other options are Mirror Image. Occasionally you'll see somebody running one of those. Arcane Explosion can be good. Let's just say you are seeing a lot of Secret Paladins. You might want Arcane Explosion just to deal with the turn 3 muster for battle. Similar kind of idea. If you're facing a Paladin, you'll keep Arcane Missiles in your opening hand more often than not to deal with muster for battle. Yeah, they're kind of the flex choices. You could also have a Clockwork Gnome as an additional 1-drop that then gives you a spare part, which is another 1 mana spell.
Cool.
So that's kind of the early game. And then you move into like some 3-cost spells, which even if you have to play them, they can be discounted by Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is really, really nice. And, you can kind of decide when to play them.
Yeah.
Which is really important because getting a secret for free is really good. It's value. But your opponent, sometimes it's really nice to be able to just set it up.
Is Mirror Entity, is it generally smarter to play Mirror Entity later on in your game? Because obviously they're going to play higher cost minions. Yeah.
Well, yes and no. I mean, 3 mana, you do not want to spend an entire turn playing Mirror Entity in the early game.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, you get a minion out of it when it's triggered. But ultimately, it's so expensive. It's anti-tempo because your opponent. Well, you get to use the minion that's generated before your opponent gets to use their minion.
Yeah.
But essentially, there are way better things that you want to be doing with your mana. But that said, there is an argument for it, especially if you've got a Sorcerer's Apprentice on board. It might be the right thing to do, moving into, say, when your opponent's going to play a piloted Shredder.
Yeah.
Because getting a free Shredder is pretty good. So it depends on the board state. So right now, a lot of the Tempo Mages have a counterspell and a Mirror Entity. A few months ago, it was Mirror Entity and Duplicate, because if you can duplicate a Flamewalker, a Sorcerer's Apprentice, hell, even a Mana Worm, doesn't even have to be high-cost minions. If you get a couple of Flamewakers in your hand, the late game suddenly just becomes crazy.
Yeah.
So Duplicate's really good, but the secrets have to kind of change with the meta because people get used to the secrets that they expect from Tempo Mage, and so they play around them better. So I think that's why Counterspell's in there right now. If you play a greedier version of the deck with more high-cost minions, you could include something like Effigy.
Right.
So it's kind of, as you start to play the deck, you might play around with the secrets just to keep your opponents on their toes. Because right now, I'm pretty sure everybody knows those are the 2 that are 90% likely to be in there.
You always know when they've played when they're playing a Mirror Entity, generally.
Yeah.
It's generally pretty signposted.
Yep. Then moving further through, Fireballs are really, really powerful in this deck because it's removal, yes, but more often than not, it's reach to get you to the end game. And again, you can reduce their cost, you can bump up your Mana Worm, and you can get additional damage out of your Flamewaker when you cast them. Azure Drake is another standard. Spell damage plus card draw is really key. Water Elemental, you could, you might just run one of those, you might run Piloted Shredders. That's more of a flex spot. Since League of Explorers, most people are running one Ethereal Conjurer. Again, it draws you a card, which is really good because you can very easily run out of steam as a Tempo Mage. And that card, depending on when you play your Ethereal Conjurer, can keep you in the game. It can help you turn the game around, or it can be the extra damage that you need to finish your opponent off.
Right, right.
And then kind of you need a couple of big bombs as well. So Dr. Boom is pretty standard in most Tempo Mages. And this one actually runs Ragnaros instead of Archmage Antonidas.
Okay, that's interesting.
And the reason is, again, it has an immediate impact on the board and represents reach for you. So if you're playing in a meta where you're playing against a lot of Zoo and they're likely to have a bunch of stuff on board, Ragnaros' power is very diminished.
Right.
But if you're playing in a slower game where people have like fewer big minions, it can either remove one of those minions or it can do the 8 damage to the face that you need it to do. Whereas Archmage Antonidas, the turn you play it, you might be able to generate a couple of fireballs by playing low-cost spells, but that doesn't help you if you're about to die. Whereas Rag can win you the game. But I'll show you the other deck list. And this is the one that you'll see me playing in the games that follow. And yeah, I mean, Archmage is pretty much was a staple of this deck because it can be incredibly powerful. And there's definitely an argument that in a slower meta, it can be pretty useful because it can just, give you the additional reach that you need.
Right.
So in terms of this list, there's just one Arcane Blast. There's a Forgotten Torch in here. Again, it's like good kind of cheapish removal, and then that increases the likelihood that you're going to draw your burn later on in the game.
I love Forgotten Torch.
It's a very cool card.
Yep.
And yeah, one counterspell, one mirror entity. And then the really surprise twist in this list is Violet Teacher. And I've never actually seen that in a Tempo Mage before until I came across this list. And I love it because it synergizes with all the low-cost spells.
Yeah,
so it's a token generator.
I want you to explain Violet Teacher to me because it's one card. It's a card that I've never actually used, like in any deck that I've played.
Right.
And I still don't quite understand how it works.
So let's say you're playing as a druid.
Yeah.
You might, there was an archetype called Token Druid, which basically the idea was you get Violet Teacher on the board, and you have a few different kind of low-cost options in your hand. So each time you play a spell, you get a 1/1 minion, and then you do that, you build up a board, and then you use Savage Roar.
Yep.
And so you pump them all up. So that's the idea, is it's just about kind of flooding the board with low-value minions, but multiple minions that gives you more options. And in this deck, sometimes you don't draw into the cards. Like, if Flamewakers are at the bottom of your deck, it just sucks. So sometimes you just don't draw into some of these other synergistic cards. So having just an additional one, just to get some extra value out of your spells, because you're going to have to use your spells, to remove enemy minions.
Yep.
You're going to be forced to use them sometimes. But you want to get the synergy out of them as much as you possibly can. So yeah, I think it's a really cool inclusion in this deck.
Awesome.
So let's hop into a couple of games.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first game is against the Priest.
Yep.
And as I said, I just had this crazy hot streak yesterday, and it was really fun. And so I had lots of games to choose from. None of them, funnily enough, were crazy explosive.
Right.
The kind of games where you just snowball from the very beginning and just destroy your opponent by turn 5 or 6, and that can happen. But I've chosen a couple of games that I think at least kind of represent some of the decision-making that's involved. So I've got the coin, so I decided to obviously keep Flamewaker. I would have kept Flamewaker even without the coin.
Yep.
Because I'm going up against Priest, which means could be Dragon Priest, but more likely to be Control, which means he'll be a bit slower, so I can kind of afford to hedge my bets a little bit. I also kept Frostbolt in my opening hand, and that was pretty much just in case he played a Northshire Cleric on turn 1.
Right.
Because your fear is that he's going to play a Northshire Cleric and then Velen's Chosen, so it becomes a 3/7 or whatever.
Yep.
And that's really, really hard for you to deal with, and he can just be drawing cards. But because he doesn't have the coin, he wasn't able to play Velen's Chosen on turn 2, which is why I didn't use the Frostbolt to kill it. And I decided instead to play my Sorcerer's Apprentice because that threatens the Northshire. and it still stays alive if I kill it.
Yep.
So he could use Shadow Word Pain to kill it, but he didn't. He instead used Power Word Shield to bump up his Northshire. So now I'm going to use my Frostbolt and play it for 1 mana,
Very
which is
clever.
amazing, which meant I could play the Mana Worm first.
Yep.
So now I've cleared it, and so he's not in a position to start drawing cards. So even though that's kind of like, you know, a Frostbolt and an attack to remove a 1 mana minion, it's worth doing that. And so at this point, I'm thinking it's probably control because, you know, I haven't seen any dragons yet.
I love that double mana worm buff.
Oh, it's
so
it's
good.
ridiculous, man.
It's so good.
So now I'm in a really, really good position, really strong position. And he's playing a slightly different deck to a lot of the Control Priests. Like, Shadow Madness isn't really something that you see in Control Priest anymore.
Right.
But I'm not that unhappy with him doing that because he just spent his entire turn to remove 2 of my minions. So it's kind of, you know, it's okay value removal, and I've still got a Mana Worm on board. So I decide to just play a Flame Waker, even though I'm not going to get anything out of it because I've got the other one in my hand.
Got the other one, yeah.
So that forces him to remove it because he knows it's really
Dangerous.
dangerous. But I didn't really have much else that I could do. I could have played Arcane Intellect to draw into more options, but I basically decided I want to maintain board control. I want to maintain tempo. I want to try and, you know, stay ahead here. And I'm also thinking in the back of my mind on turn 6, he can steal my Flame Waker.
Yep.
So I want to be playing the Flame Waker going as early as I can to prevent him from doing that. But he's got Shadow Word Pain, which is a pretty efficient way to deal with it. So now I'm facing a position where if I play another Flame Waker, it could get stolen. But, you know, that's just a risk that you have to run. But I've got a bunch of other options.
Yep.
So
I feel like you're in a good position here.
what do you think I should do?
Well, you're clearly going to play Mad Scientist.
I'm just thinking. I'm thinking about it.
I would have played Forgotten Torch
On-
next.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So I decide to get that Roaring Torch shuffled into my
Roaring
deck.
Torch, rather, sorry.
No,
Yep.
it's the I think the Roaring Torch is the one that you get in your deck.
Right.
In any case, and I just decide to ignore the Museum Curator because I gotta, you know, like priests, you can get them really low and then they can just start healing back up. So I need to get damage in.
Yeah.
So his attack then, what that signposts is that he's probably got a Holy Nova in hand. Or he could be trying to bluff me.
Right.
But it's more than likely that he's got a Holy Nova in hand.
See, bluffing is a thing that I really haven't mastered in this game. I'm not good at it. I just don't have the finesse.
Right.
I mean, again, this is why we're doing this series, but like, I don't quite know enough about who I'm playing
Yeah.
to kind of
You gotta like
to figure out
you gotta-
ways in which I can manipulate. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You gotta know
Manipulate
the
their-
game pretty much inside and out.
Yeah.
So I decided to just play into it. I was hoping the Flame Waker would hit the piloted Sky Golem twice, so that way I could trade my Mad Scientist in and get rid of that minion.
Right.
I thought, when it didn't do that, I thought about trading my Mad Scientist in just to get the secret up.
Yep.
But ultimately I decided that I wanted the damage to his face. And that's maybe a misplay because I think the secret that popped up was Counterspell. So if I'd bumped my Mad Scientist in and he'd played Holy Nova, it would have been nullified.
Right.
So that actually kind of was potentially a misplay, but we'll see what happens with the secret. I mean, it's not like Priest isn't going to play any more secrets.
Yep.
So yeah, Ethereal Conjurer, amazing card. You know, Pyroblast, it's turn 7. It's not that far until turn 10. He's at 15 health. I just have to...
So good. Pyroblast is so mean.
It's such a mean thing just to get for free from an Ethereal Conjurer.
Yeah, it
you
really
know?
is. Yeah. I love it.
So yeah, I am just trying to wear him down to the point where I can burn him out, basically.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's got a good trade here. He could have a Shadow Word Death to take care of my minion and then just start hitting me in the face. And he does, but at least the counterspell you know, that's pretty good value.
Yeah.
It means that he has to either trade or kind of take the risk that I'm not going to get something amazing out of his Death Lord if I can kill it.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, A, I have to get rid of the Death Lord
Yep.
because although I've got burn, I'm going to need to do some damage with minions. But B, I'm thinking, what's left in my deck? Fair few cards, but a lot of them are spells. In terms of minions, I mean, it's probably not hugely unlikely that I could get Antonidas or something
Yep.
out of the Death Lord. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to kill it one way or another no matter what. And I just need one of those to connect with it, and then I can ping it.
Yep.
But it's a Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yep.
Which is, you know,
It's fine.
not too bad. It's still another minion on the board.
Yep. Can't
Uh,
complain.
and so, yeah, like in my hand, I've got Dr. Boom, which is really strong.
And Pyroblast now sitting at 9.
Sitting at 9, yep. But I'm kind of figuring that he might not let that be. Of course. Why? Like every time
always-
we play, I show you a priest game. They always like as they're about to lose, they play.
Yeah.
they
That's like
Elise.
that's almost like it's the last gasp.
Yeah. So right now, yep, I could play Pyroblast and I could hit him, so I can do 13 damage.
Yep.
But you know, I'm definitely better off
Just draw it out a little.
Well, just better off ensuring
Yeah.
that I can finish him next turn.
Yeah.
So take him down to 6, full board.
You're
it's
in
a
great
pretty
shape.
dominant position.
You are in great shape.
But like I was saying, I mean, Ethereal Conjurer was definitely the difference.
Yep.
You know, being able to get that Pyroblast. I mean, you know, on this turn I'd be playing my Azure Drake to try and draw into something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was maybe it's that. Maybe that's why I'm having luck with Tempo Mage right now. Is it's those little tweaks like that. Like Ethereal Conjurer is a very strong card.
Yep.
You know, it might be easy to remove for your opponent, but it just gives you so much versatility in terms of your spells. Anyway, so that got me to rank 9.
Fantastic.
And next up, we're going to watch a Tempo Mage Mirror.
Cool.
Okay, our next game is Tempo Mage Mirror, as I said. I thought I'd just kind of illustrate what it's like when you go up against somebody who's running something very similar to what you have.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's a pretty... So what am I thinking about here? I'm thinking what you really want to do, right, in terms of the mulligan, is you want to get your low-cost minions that are going to synergize with spells. But you, by and large, don't keep the spells unless you've already got those minions.
Yep.
Because the minions are the key thing, right?
Yep.
But in some matchups, you might want to keep some of your spells. Like as I mentioned, you know, against Paladin, Arcane Missiles is good. You know, there's a few examples where you kind of know what their early game looks like, and you just want to have the removal to deal with what their best case play is going to be.
Yep.
But in this case, it worked out pretty well because I've got my Mana Worm,
And the
I've
coin.
got my Sorcerer's Apprentice, I've got the coin, I've got Arcane Blast, but I can't actually kill the Mana Worm. So I could coin into Arcane Blast, but then that'll still leave it on 1 health.
Yeah.
So I think the coin's more valuable than that.
Agreed.
So I'm just gonna sit it out and see what happens. And I should say, Luce, that this deck, when it draws bad,
right.
it draws so bad.
Yeah, because I was sort of thinking, I mean, how reliable is this deck? I mean, you did say that you'd won 8 games in a row, which suggests a certain degree of consistency.
Maybe in the right meta and when you're experienced enough with it, maybe.
Yeah.
But honestly, like, I feel like even though there's so much synergy between all the early cards, sometimes you can just end up with the handful of big bombs that you have in your deck just in your hand at the start of the game.
Yeah.
And it just makes it really hard. And then if you don't get your card draw and you're drawing into the wrong stuff later on,
Yeah.
you know, again, it can just go horribly, horribly wrong. But when it is the complete opposite of that,
Right.
like when you actually go ballistic with 2 Flamewakers on board or whatever,
Yep.
you know, that kind of makes up for it.
Oh, for
So
sure.
there I decided to use the Forgotten Torch to deal with the Mana Worm rather than playing a minion, which is kind of the opposite of what you want to do, but it completely paid off because it meant on turn 3, I can play Sorcerer's Apprentice, I can deal with his minion for free, and then I can play a 1-mana Unstable Portal. So that was absolutely the right thing to do.
Yep.
Because he had the Frostbolt in his hand, so if I had played the Sorcerer's Apprentice before, wouldn't have got any value, basically.
Now, what are you going to do on this turn? Oh, yeah.
Well, I've got my... That's a pretty good draw from an Unstable
Yeah,
Portal.
it's not too bad, yeah. 4/4.
I mean, I float a mana, I have to ping his face. That's not ideal. But at least I've got a 4/4 on the board. And, you know, that's what you're trying to do. You want to establish board control. You want the initiative in the game.
Yeah.
And I do. Because now I can decide how to trade.
Yeah.
And so the obvious thing to do here would be play an Ethereal Conjurer because it's a waste of a Fireball. I could play a Fireball and keep my 4/4, or I could trade my 4/4 and have a 6/3 and a spell that gives me a bit more flexibility. So Flame Cannon's pretty much the obvious choice here because it's just such great removal for such a low cost. And then, yeah, I don't want him to have spell damage. I don't want him to have any minions on board.
Yep.
So I just trade. And now, like, if he's got another Frostbolt, he can deal with it. You know, there's a bunch of things he can do to deal with it. But thankfully, he just wants to he just wants to be able to deal with it next turn.
Yeah.
But I've got some. It's kind of an interesting turn, this one.
It is.
I do want to get rid of the Mad Scientist, but then once that happens, he'll have a secret up, so you got to keep that in mind.
I mean, you could play 3 of your cards right now.
Yeah, yeah, and that's pretty much what I'm thinking. I'm just mulling over if there are any other options other than dropping Mana Worm, Flame Waker, and Flame Cannon, because it's kind of overkill to kill a Mad Scientist with the Flame Cannon, but. It's really efficient. It gets my Flame Waker going. I maintain the board.
Going.
It means that there's now 3 relatively high priority minions that he has to remove. And, you know, okay, so he's got a secret up.
Yeah, what's the secret, I wonder?
Well, I'm thinking that it's going to be either Mirror Entity or it's going to be Counterspell.
Right.
Just because that's what the meta is at the moment.
Yeah.
So Dr. Boom is a strong turn 7 play. It's the strongest turn 7 play there is, basically. Although he could have, actually, if he had, he could have wiped my board with Flame Strike.
Right.
So anyway, I figure, well, I played the Sorcerer's Apprentice to test for Mirror Entity. It's not Mirror Entity.
Right.
So now I'm like, well, I guess that means it's Counterspell, but it could be Duplicate.
Yeah.
So I just figure, you know what? I'm just gonna try and trigger Counterspell.
Yeah.
He's on 21. I'm just going to leave his minions up. So I trigger it, and then I just go, you know what? You have to deal with my board.
Yeah.
I'm just going to hit you in the face.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if I can get him to 9, I've got another 6 damage in my hand.
Yeah, amazing.
It's not going to be that hard to finish him off, hopefully.
Yeah. What is he going to do here?
Well, you know, highest attack stat minion. Makes sense to take that out first. So now he's got 8 damage on board. Well, I can do 8 damage on board. So now he's thinking, you know, how can he make the most out of this boom bot? Didn't work out very well for him. And he's got his own Flame Waker. So, like, you know. So he might have been better off doing that first before he killed the boom bot.
Yeah.
But in any case, you know,
you've got him.
It's all over.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's the mirror matchup.
Thank you, Cam.
My pleasure.
Once again, I am wildly inspired, and we'll go home and, you know, screw Secrets Paladin.
Yep.
This is what it's all about. Tempo Mage.
It's really fun.
Yeah.
It's really fun, and it's just fun coming to grips with it.
Yeah.
So I hope you have as much luck as I have, and I hope that my luck doesn't suddenly turn.
Fingers crossed.
Yep.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Tune in next time where we will be looking at another deck.
Yep.
For everything else Hearthstone, stick with IGN.
Bye.
Bye.